The characteristics of the global intrinsic value strategy is that we are incredibly long-term and we are absolutely focused on trying to avoid downside risk. In terms of downside, we are thinking about permanent destruction of capital. That's what we mean by risk. So we're trying to avoid those businesses that write down their assets, that issue equity, that go bust, or in countries where you just can't get your capital out. The key differentiating features of this strategy is really all about risk. Risk on an individual basis, risk on a systematic basis, and risk on a macro basis. In terms of risk at the individual basis, we spend our time looking at the financial and the operating leverage of businesses. So we spend far more time looking at balance sheets and cash flows and what can go wrong than anything else. In terms of systematic risk, we're looking to avoid correlations of risk across the portfolio in terms of financials or in terms of pharma. When it comes to think about macro risk, we spend our time looking around the world for where economic and financial bubbles have built up, and then we just try and avoid them like the plague. Because when bubbles build up, you get an expansion of credit, you get an expansion of multiple, and when those bubbles implode, that is your greatest single source of downside risk. The difference between forecasting and analyzing is when you're forecasting, you're trying to predict the unpredictable. You're trying to predict the future, which is unknowable. In terms of analyzing is really about thinking about a range of outcomes. One other characteristic we look for is for businesses that take a really long-term view. They're not trying to milk the business today. They're not trying to earn the highest margin they can today. Rather, they are investing hard for the future. They're investing in R&D today. They are investing in building up their sales force today because they're wanting to grow the business over the very long run, not just for the next few quarters. Our approach to valuation is all about intrinsic value. A lot of traditional value managers will look at price to equities, price to book, but to my mind, that takes no account of the returns or the duration or the balance sheet risk of the business. Intrinsic value is looking at the real fundamental underlying value of the business, which is why we spend more time thinking about debt-adjusted cash flows, EV to unlevered free cash flow, rather than price to equity or price to book. We're also looking for businesses that are over-investing and under-earning today, which is why sometimes when you look at headline multiples, they can be completely misleading as to the true intrinsic value and nature of a business. When thinking about intrinsic value, you have to be very aware of current multiples. Sometimes current multiples can be elevated because of cyclical or structural factors. Sometimes they can be elevated because a business is fundamentally over-earning and charging its customers too much. And so we're trying to look at what the true long-term intrinsic value of the business is. Is it over-earning? Is it under-investing or not? When it comes to intrinsic value, we also like to have and apply common sense. We like to do the market cap cross-check and just think from first basis, does it make sense for this company? Is the market cap right, or is it far too big? Is it over-earning today? Or actually, is it investing so hard today that its small market cap just does not in any way represent the intrinsic value of this business over the very long term? One of our key differentiating investment features is that we are very, very long term. And this is becoming more and more important today because the rate of change and technological disintermediation has never been greater than today. So to ask that question, is this business model going to be around in 10, 20 years, is becoming harder and becoming more and more important than ever before.
投资一定有风险，基金投资有赚有赔，申购前应详阅公开说明书。